So good morning and afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session, which will focus on education and youth, digital access to leverage the youth dividend. My name is Lindsay Nefesh-Clark, and I'm a WEI board member, and it's my pleasure and privilege to moderate today's session. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guest speakers. Thank you for joining us today. A brief framing of this discussion, it's really a critical subject. We know that digital empowerment can be a powerful catalyst for inclusive, sustainable development. And digital access and that knowledge of at least basic digital skills, as outlined in Sustainable Development Goal 4, are increasingly indispensable to access formal employment and exercise one's rights and full citizenship in increasingly digitalized economies and societies. And yet, there is a persistent global digital divide and digital gender divide. You may have seen that the International Telecommunications Union has just published its ITU Facts and Figures 2021 report. And as the report stressed, the ability to connect remains profoundly unequal, with 37% of the global population offline, and of the 2.9 billion still offline, an estimated staggering 96% live in developing countries. And the digital divide looms large in Africa, which remains the least connected region in the world. Meanwhile, it's projected that as the world's population will continue to grow in sub-Saharan Africa, the population is projected to double by 2050 from 1 billion to 2.2 billion, and that half of that population will be under 25 years old. Today, young people represent 60% of the unemployed population in Africa, with the vast majority of young people working in the informal economy, according to the International Labour Organization. And it's estimated that on average, 11 million young people join the African labor market each year, yet the continent generates only 3.7 million jobs annually. So we're really seeing this gap, and that for most youth, the informal sector is the default rather than the exception. So these are huge challenges, and the stakes of this subject, so that is the nexus between education, youth, and digital transformation, are very high. But if the right policies are in place, and if smart strategic actions are taken to promote digital inclusion, train youth, and create high-quality jobs, amongst other things, this could be a huge opportunity for the continent. Now, it's my immense pleasure to welcome Gerald Chirinda, the founder of Future African Forum, as a guest speaker today, and Gerald will deliver our keynote. Thank you, Gerald, for being with us today and delivering the opening remarks about this subject. Your work is really at the heart of this subject. And I must say that I've been following your activities from afar with much admiration since we last met at Wilton Park a few years back. And that was when Margot and the team were laying the groundwork for the creation of WEI. So it's great to be here today with you. Thank you again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and I really appreciate the introduction. It's really wonderful to see how this has evolved and has developed since we last met. I think a couple of years ago at Wilton Park, as you've mentioned. Allow me to begin by expressing my most profound gratitude to Dr. Margot Thomas and the wonderful team behind this incredible event. It's truly an honor to be invited as a speaker on a subject that is incredibly important to all of us. And my remarks today, Lindsay, will really be largely focused on education, as this is the bedrock of even participating in a digital economy. And as we're all aware, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has upended our societies in a very big way, leaving hundreds of millions of children out of school. Now, education, as we know it, is a human right, and it has to be accessible to everyone. It also has to be steeped in values. That is something that is incredibly important. Now, as the world is going digital, digital access is still a preserve for those with means, especially on the African continent, and is not equitable. And there's no equitable access, especially with the hard to reach populations, which are still struggling with access. Now, behind this, you will realize that the challenges in the digital access largely, are due to issues such as infrastructure. Not enough infrastructure, is available. There's no electricity. I think half the African population does not have access to decent, electricity. This is when we look at this issue of education access, especially digital education access, we then have to think about it from a holistic perspective. This is not something that one sort of individual can tackle on their own, or one sort of organization or sector, but it requires a multi-sectoral approach to tackling access to education, because there are various components, various players who are involved in making sure that digital education becomes broadly and widely available to most people. Now, the second thing that we have to consider and look at is the education curriculums. For a majority of people on the continent require to actually, upgrade their educational skills so that they can be accommodated in the digital economy, and the digital era that we find ourselves in currently. Now, a lot of the curriculums and the content that, the 11 million, young people that are entering the job market are not necessarily digital. And you will find, for the most part, are no longer as relevant as they should be for the fourth industrial revolution and the era we find ourselves in at the moment. Now, this is something that we have to begin to look at. The most inspiring thing, however, for me, is we have a lot of young people themselves who are coming up with incredible solutions to actually tackle this. I mean, I will give you an example of a young group that I've interacted with from Nigeria, who are actually offering digital education, teaching young people how to code, etc., for free, right? Now, that is revolutionary. So you'll find that from an innovation perspective, you already have young people who are coming up with, incredible and innovative products to be able to reach their peers, but they are somewhat disappointed by the infrastructure. They are also a bit disappointed by the policy, which is not moving at a pace that you would expect it to move at. Now, the shift from the economy we're in currently to a digital economy, presents an opportunity, for leaders and actors to redefine what the future of education, especially in Africa and in low and lower middle income countries, could look like in the future. And there's an opportunity here to, as most people would mention nowadays, to leapfrog. Instead of having to invest billions of dollars in trying to build physical classrooms, they can actually redirect a lot of their efforts to making sure that there's adequate digital infrastructure, that is made accessible to all people, thereby making access to very basic education accessible to most people. Now, from a personal level, I guess, I was requested to speak on this because of my experience within the education space. I mean, I know we've probably all been students before, and we have experience behind the classrooms, but my experience has gone a bit further than that. In that, 7 years ago, my co-founder and myself decided to set up an education finance company, because we realized that access to education, there was a barrier from a financial perspective. This is something that we know is common, education financing in more developed markets and countries. But however, where we were coming from, and that's Zimbabwe at the time, we did not have this within the space and the sector itself. So we realized that this is providing an opportunity for us to actually come about with an intervention that still allows children to go to school, and does not put pressure on parents, and leave them at the mercy of, loan sharks, etc., which is widely common, especially in some of the societies that we live in. Because one of the things we learned fairly quickly from personal experiences was, if there's one thing that African parents value, it's the education of their children, and they are willing to go to very extreme extents to make sure that their children have access to education. And I would be happy to say that that small business that really grew from tiny savings that we had ended up growing and attracting investors, and making sure that there were thousands of children who actually got access to education, just by offering facilities which allowed parents to pay for the school fees of their education upfront, and then make repayments on a monthly basis to us over a period of time, thereby relieving personal pressure. So you would realize that there's an entire ecosystem that goes into this. But more recently, I've been thinking about this and looking at it from a digital perspective. And I've just, started working with a huge and great foundation that's based out of the US, to see how best we can offer digital learning material and content to children between the ages of 2 and 12 years old. On the African continent as well, for free, because they believe that education, as I mentioned earlier on, is a human right, and every child should have basic access to this. So essentially, my call to action is, at a personal level, I think we all have a part to play, in making sure that education is made available to as many children as possible. Because when we invest in education, we are setting ourselves up for success. We are setting ourselves up to participate, in a more active way within the digital economy. And the best way forward, for us to providing universal digital access to education is for a collaborative approach in providing digital education. So everyone has a part to play. Innovators have a part to play. Policymakers have a part to play. Funders, donors have a part to play. Educators have a part to play, as well as students. So I really, really look forward to the conversations that are going to take place in the next couple of minutes, and just some of the innovations that will come out of this particular discussion. And I thank you all for indulging me. Thank you very much, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Gerald. Really insightful remarks, and actually very wide-reaching. And you clearly spotlight the challenges, and at the same, there's a clear message, is that the only way to turn the situation around is through a multi-stakeholder collaborative approach. And what I really loved is also this message of hope, that it's precisely, we can look to youth for innovation as well, to drive solutions. I also want to thank you and congratulate you on the impressive work that you're accomplishing in terms of providing youth with educational opportunities. But yeah, it's very, it's a vast subject, and you've mentioned various aspects ranging from challenges such as access to digital infrastructure, skills, needing to transform, upgrade curricula, needing to have the effective policies in place to be able to drive that transformation, the funding, the financing, making sure that we have the financing in place, and also to leverage the innovations in edtech, etc. But there are clearly hopeful messages in there too. So let's now continue the discussion. I'd like now to welcome our panelists here today, who are all engaged in very powerful work relating to the critical issues that we're addressing. So please join me in welcoming Jeff Achiampong, and I hope I pronounced your surname correctly, who is the co-founder of Blossom Academy, which is working in partnership with development agencies and businesses to close the tech skills gap in Africa, notably through data science boot camps and dedicated career support. Ohinawa Constance Ankoma, founder and executive director of Erudite Women's Empowerment Foundation, a registered women-centered nonprofit organization in Ghana that works to create opportunities for girls and young women in marginalized communities. Sefako Komabu Pomayai, PhD policy advisor and an international disability rights advocate, and Elizabeth Patterson, the founder of Girls Education Initiative of Ghana and also WEI co-lead of the Ghana Youth Team. Now, to the audience following the discussion, we will open up the floor for questions shortly, so please do note down any questions you have as we proceed. Let's jump right in. Constance, may I begin with you? Now, on the basis of your experience with Erudite Women's Empowerment Foundation, notably to support and promote the empowerment of girls and young women in marginalized communities, what would you say, in what ways are technology and digitalization shifting perceptions, opportunities, and threats for youth today? And, who are we at risk of leaving behind in this digital revolution?
Thank you very much, Lindsay. And a big thank you to the WEI team for giving me this opportunity. Now, straight to the question. The first part asks that what ways are technology and digitalization shifting perceptions, opportunities, and threats for youth today? Yes, we all attest to the fact that technology and digitalization have advanced more rapidly than any innovation in our history and really transforming societies. We can talk of digitalization enhancing connectivity, financial inclusion, access to trade, public services, etc. for young people today. Today, virtual learning environments and distance learning have opened up programs to young people who would otherwise be excluded. But there are also threats to this digital revolution. Technologies can threaten privacy. They can erode security and fuel inequality among the youth. Social media, for instance, connects almost half of the entire global population, which eventually promotes social inclusion. Now, young people are able to make their voices heard and talk to people across the world in real time, like I have the opportunity to present my issues now. However, it can also reinforce prejudices and sow discord by giving hate speeches and misinformation, or simply through cyberbullying. Let me say now the second part of the question, which asks that who are we leaving behind in this digital revolution we find ourselves in? I actually worry and suspect that the digital revolution we find ourselves in will make life better for some of us, but worse for others. Why am I saying this? Much of the technological inventions coming out today aims to serve the elite, when actually we should be aiming at equality for all. So those yet to be connected remain cut off from the benefits of the new era and remain further behind. Many of these people include women and girls in marginalized communities. We can talk of the elderly, persons living with disabilities, or persons from ethnic or linguistic minorities, indigenous groups, as well as residents of poor or remote areas, specifically in developing communities. A typical example, last year, our team at Erudite Women's Empowerment Foundation planned to organize an empowerment summit for teen girls from deprived communities. Then COVID showed up. So our team had to re-strategize, and the only option available was to have a virtual summit. But the major challenge was how we could get our targeted beneficiaries to benefit from the program online due to lack of access to the internet. So yes, we all have the potential, I believe, to reach millions of people across the world through digital skills training, like Gerald mentioned earlier. So I believe we should pledge our support to make sure that the gap is bridged, and we should ensure that no one is left behind truly in this new era. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Constance. You very compellingly point out that yes, there's this wide array of, let's call them the digital dividends, everything from employment opportunities to financial inclusion, health, with digital technologies and so on. But at the same time, this digital transformation opens up the challenges of protecting people's digital rights. And this, you really drive home this key message of the risk of widening inequalities. And those people who risk being left behind. And actually, WEI published a policy brief on the subject of the impact of the pandemic and the link with the digital divide, and specifically the adverse impact for girls and women. And that, yes, there's this risk that it is aggravating pre-existing structural inequalities. And thank you also, Constance, for the call to action. Let me now turn to Safar Kaur, and say our attention rather to the potential solutions to address these pretty daunting challenges. So Safar Kaur, you're an international disability rights advocate, an educator, researcher, and policy analyst for the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and you also work as the Resource Center Coordinator of the Ghana Education Service. Can you please tell us about the work that you're doing to provide opportunities for digital access, literacy, and entrepreneurship to empower young people, and especially women and girls, as well as people with disabilities, in their livelihoods, voice, and agency?
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much. Thank you to Margot and Elizabeth and all the coordinators for this great program. I really appreciate it. And as I listen to the two speakers, taking it from the ground, I just want to build on that. And I have to correct something very quickly. I used to be the coordinator of the Resource Center Coordinator in the Ghana Education Service. I work with the Ghana Education Service for the past 20 years plus, but I'm no more the Resource Center Coordinator. That I want to put it out there. So yeah, the reality, I'm actually coming into this platform with these three identities. I'm a person with disability myself, and I'm a Ghanaian. So despite all those titles, policy analyst, advocate, and what, I really want us to have this discussion as organic as we want it to be. Practically, we don't have the digital citizenship yet in Ghana. If I should pick it up from there. In other words, we don't have the education or the competencies to even start the digital literacy. When we talk about digital literacy, which basically is just the skills, right? The skills that we need to progress. So I want to tackle it from what that aspect is first, as the skills, and before we even link it to entrepreneurship or whatever job or employment we want to give to the people. But my focus is with the people with disabilities, especially. So as much as I will talk about this, I want us to focus on the people with disabilities, girls, and any other group that you can think about. Yeah, so first, as a country, even though I'm presently in the US, but I'm a Ghanaian, as I said, as a country in Ghana's education is concerned, we are not yet ready, or we haven't yet prepared ourselves to have this type of education. Why? Because as Gerald said already, we need to redefine education now, practically, and we have to be very much intentional. Why intentional? Because we need to make sure that we are really including everybody, and the purpose of this type of education should really be very much inclusive. So when I look at the world in which I am now in the US, and I have to say that I work with the Vermont Center for Independent Living, and I work with all the students on IEP program and 504 programs. That means all students with disabilities in the Vermont state, I work with them practically. And when I see how productive these students with disabilities, and I work with students from age 14 to 26, So when I see how productive they have been, and I compare them to my organization, that is Enlightening and Empowering People with Disabilities in Africa, in Ghana, connecting them to the Ghana Education Service, we are nowhere yet in this game. As much as we know the world is running so fast, I will pick it up from the policy level now to say that if we want to attack, or that's a word to, because it's a bigger race now, that a time will come, as Constance has already said, we are going to leave behind a lot of people that we know they are already, we already lost them at a point in time, but I don't even know how invisible they will be when we don't include them from the beginning. So from the policy perspective, I will suggest, or I will say that we should be thinking right now as a country to have that type of digital education, digital citizenship, to make sure that we build that platform, because we don't even have the platforms, or let me say the tools for this type of education as a country. In other words, there should be a part of our syllabus, even if it should not be a syllabus, a part of the syllabus, a different syllabus altogether about digital literacy. That's how I am looking at it, because as early as second grade, from here, we are helping students to do all these sort of things. All that we talk about now is coding, but it's not everybody who will do the coding, but there are other things that we can use the digital literacy for. For instance, we are very good at WhatsApp, right? We can, like WhatsApp in every part of Africa. The Americans, most of them don't even know about WhatsApp. I tell most of my friends, unless you have a friend in Africa before you know about WhatsApp, that's the reality. But WhatsApp is doing a great thing now in terms of business. I know we have practically been working with this organization called Child Online, and basically we are trying to empower some of our students in the eastern region in Ghana, that is EAPD Africa, working with Child Online to see how best we can empower this student, especially first to give them this training if we are not going to work from the top hierarchy, like from policy level, basically in our own setting, NGO level. That is how we are trying to do, to empower them, to lead them through the education first before we can even give them the job. So in other words, they must have the training, the education about what it entails to be and what they want to do. Because one other thing that we realize on the ground is we are not culturally responsive yet, or sensitized to that level to know what it is, especially with the children with disabilities. The digital world, it's a different world for Ghanaian child with disability. The Ghanaian child who has dyslexia, or who has invisible disability, who has no idea what type of disability he or she has, that is the process that we are leading them through, to know that you can also use maybe this tablet, this phone, or this PC to do something productive. So policy-wise, as a nation, I see it to be something that we have to factor into our educational system, whether to add it to a curriculum or whether to be on its own could be the very first beginning. But the question is, who are the people going to teach this digital literacy or citizenship? Our teachers are not yet ready. We haven't prepared our teachers as a country, because as much as I know, in the educational system, everything that we do, we have to prepare the leaders before we even trickle it down. So that is another thing we want to look at. And I don't know how this platform will lead us or help us to achieve these aims in the Ghanaian setting, as much as we want to go in policy way. But the good thing is, we are picking it from somewhere. So the teachers are not yet ready. And as Gerald said, the whole thing revolves around funding. Funding has been one significant, biggest challenge for every beginning. Unless the people even understand the situation in which we are now, that the world is really drastically changing into that digital world, then unless they to that particular aspect and change their mindset before. Because when I am a science teacher, let me say, comparing the digital knowledge that we are having now to ICT that we were used to. Formerly, when somebody goes through the IT trainings, we end up maybe dismantling laptops and building them up or repairing. That is not what we are talking about now, but that is what we are used to, because when I was first having the discussion with how we can empower our students under EEPD Africa, it was all the conversation was going toward that type of IT, but it's not about IT. It's about skills development in this digital world to empower the student or the person with disability to be very functional and live an independent life in the future. In other words, when we link it to the entrepreneurship so that it can be productive. So in general, if I should leave with us any 3 steps that we have to use to solve this problem, policy-wise, is practically, there should be a change of syllabus or a new syllabus. We must be very intentional about that and purposeful. As much as we do that, we must make sure that we include everybody around the table. And you can't do that without involving the student themselves. So when I started the empowerment program, I had to talk with the student. What do you want to do? Do you think you can be very useful in this field? We can't just think that everybody will be digitally inclined at this age in Ghana. 1. 2, the teachers who are going to teach this must be also empowered, must be trained, and they must also be very much equipped with what they need to, because at times we just do the pilot trainings in Ghana, we train them, we leave them. What are they going to use to perform the duties? Then that leads us to funding. Like the type of funding we need, is it from governmental level or is it from our own NGO setup that we have to? So in short, I will just leave it there. Maybe as people also ask more questions, we can address it from that place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Safako. And I have to say, you preempted me. You actually anticipated my second question, which I'm going to come back to the other panelists, which is about the sort of top 3 actions. Absolutely wonderful. Just to say, on the subject of capacity building of teachers, this is also, of course, an issue, a challenge that we're grappling with in Europe too. And the European Commission is trying to address that challenge. Let me move to you, Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth, so we've seen the impact, sadly, we've seen the egregious impact of digital exclusion and inequalities during this pandemic, and precisely the struggles of countries to transition and communities to transition to remote and virtual learning. And owing to obstacles that have already been mentioned by previous panelists, such as lack of access to broadband, lack of access to digital infrastructure, and lack of digital skills, and they've really been a major barrier to young people's education, especially during this pandemic. So my question for you is, what can be done to empower countries, especially those for which these issues are pronounced, to bridge this technological and digital divide, and to adapt and transform their education systems to meet the needs of youth, including those with disabilities?
Okay. Can everybody hear me well?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. So I believe that all of our previous panelists have already touched base and kind of answered my question to some capacity a little bit. But just to simply put it, I think that countries such as Ghana can bridge the digital divide between for people with disabilities and women and girls by introducing low-tech solutions such as like for some of us who work in very remote parts of the country. You go to a school, and I live in Accra, just let me preface that. I live in Accra, and compared to some of the schools where GIG students, Girls Education Initiative of Ghana students are in, you'll go to a school and they have the computers there, and yet, like Sefakor mentioned, a teacher does not even know how to turn it on or operate it, right? So I would advocate for and our teachers to be trained to use low-tech solutions to reach all the students. And an example of a low-tech solution is maybe just writing on a chalkboard to explain what's the parts of a computer, and then also trying to practicalize it and going into that archaic computer lab and actually showing students how they could turn it on and use it to make use of it in their everyday lives. Because what I've found through a lot of the work that I do is that when the technologies are there and the teachers and the people who are supposed to be the ones disseminating the information for us, they themselves are not trained enough to impart that knowledge for us. So I believe that we really can utilize low technology in our classrooms, from just basic pen and paper to reach persons with special needs and different learners everywhere. Because I, for one, as someone who acquired disability later on in my life, I'm a visual learner. So if I'm in a classroom and my professor is trying to teach in a didactic manner where it's just one way, where it's blanket for all of us and we're supposed to understand just things being scrolled on the board, and you're supposed to receive that knowledge. I need to see it, and at times I even need to hear it. Like if I'm reading a book, I need to have the audio version with me. So I think, for number one, what we need to get through to our educators and the systems that make the decisions for our education systems is to realize that some of our students, we all don't learn in the same way, and differentiation is very key in order to be inclusive for all of our learners when it comes to those of us in the city and those of us in the rural areas, because definitely there's a disparity between where people live and the access to technology and access to means of disseminating information. So I would strongly advocate that we utilize the most basic technologies available to us in order to reach everyone that we're trying to include in this paradigm of the new education system. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And again, I mean, another very strong call for digital equity, for ensuring that the digital transformation is inclusive, and very concrete, proposals of concrete ways for various actors to achieve that. And what all the panelists have made clear so far is, this has got to cover various aspects. So when we talk about adapting or upgrading the educational system, if we're going to ensure that it's inclusive, then and that we achieve digital equity, we have to look at various aspects precisely to ensure that we're not leaving anybody behind. I'd like to move to you, Jeff, and then I'll come back to the panelists to talk again about concrete actions. But Jeff, I'm going to ask you a very easy question, and it is, what should our vision of the future be when it comes to digital empowerment and inclusion among youth? And I mean, if we want to ensure inclusive, sustainable development in our digital area that we're calling the fourth industrial revolution, and to enable youth to fully participate in economies and societies that increasingly rely on technology, what is that vision in your opinion?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you all for having me. So, I mean, I believe my response will be more geared towards education, because that's a space in which I operate in. So just to answer the question, right, there's a philosophy I've always had, which is that we need to start designing courses and content with the end consumer in mind, and also do it in a very scalable fashion. So what I mean by this is that if you look on the African continent, the smartphone penetration rate is very high, which means that smartphones should be part of the equations when imparting skills development. But unfortunately, most of these apps and stuff being developed are not geared towards what we have available. But I think that also leads to another problem, which is the internet penetration rate, which clearly it's around, I believe, 18% at the moment, compared to the 30% global internet penetration rate. So I think that the government and telecommunication firms could actually collaborate and figure out how they can subsidize some of these costs and make sure that especially those in rural communities could have access to the relevant content to help them be upskilled and be relevant for the global economy. The second point to that question is, if you had asked me a month ago why I'm passionate about Blossom and why I believe it's something needed for the future, I would have told you that, hey, I'm tired of the fact that the data that's being generated here on the continent is being shipped abroad to be analyzed and brought back to us, right? Which is the trend that we are seeing at the moment. And it's happening in the agricultural sector, where foodstuffs are going abroad, coming back. And I had a conversation with this person, with this lady from the Ministry of Education on the flight, and she challenged my thought a bit, right? She, rather said that there should be, significant investment in the manufacturing of technology. What she means by that is that if we actually can propel youth to start, building technology locally, whether it's something as simple as phone accessories, and essentially upgrade towards electronics. This means that the data is generated locally, which means that it's also going to be analyzed by us, which means that we have more control in the future as to how we want to be digitally empowered. By the moment, everything is being done outside, which means that the professionals outside have a way of controlling how we think, how we design our products and services, and how we're able to actually provide value to one another, which I think is very problematic. And I'll give you the last point that I have as well. It's actually inspired by a conversation I had 2 days ago with one of our employer partners. I caught up with him to ask, how one of our graduates are doing. We placed a graduate at his firm, and he chuckled and said, he too moved to Italy, which is actually a trend that I've been seeing a lot, where majority of our graduates, we train them in this, globally recognized skill set. They work at a company briefly, they move abroad. Someone could categorize that as the brain drain, right? And we're still talking about how we can actually, essentially design to make sure that African data scientists are solving Africa's problems and propelling the continent forward. However, the more I thought about this problem, I realized that the reality is two things. Number one, there's an awareness gap, right? That there are platforms available where these youths can actually go on and make a decent living while being based here in Ghana. But number two, which is the most important, is that these platforms are not designed with Africa's youth in mind. I've spoken to too many people at conferences where they tell me, wait, are you sure, hiring someone from Nigeria would actually be a good idea, right, for a project that I have in America? So I believe that as we think about the future of how we can get youth to be digitally empowered, we need to start thinking about what platforms we can start designing and how we can include them in decision making, so that once these platforms are deployed, more people will be attracted to the idea of, hey, saying, let me provide this youth with opportunity because they are relevant, they are capable, and it can actually help implement solutions to this problem that I have.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jeff. Excellent points. And what I'd like to do now, I know we don't have much time, but I'd like to ask each of you then, as Sefako, you preempted me, but what would be your top three, let's say, recommendations, concrete actions for governments or all actors? Because of course, as Gerald, he prefaced this discussion by saying it's going to require multi-stakeholder approach, cross-sector approach. But what would be the top three strategies that you would recommend? And I'm going to go in the opposite order. So starting with you, Jeff.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. So, there was a recent report from the IFC that said that 20% of Ghanaian companies surveyed recruit internationally for digital talents, mainly because they're unable to actually find locally skilled talents. I was very sad actually reading that report because there's a very high youth unemployment rate that has been prefaced already. Now, I think that governments have the responsibility to essentially incentivize local companies and multinationals expanding to Ghana or across their continent to hire local talents. This could be done in something as simple as providing tax holidays for a couple of years to say, hey, if you hire local talent, you give them internships against the door, you actually could, quote unquote, not have to pay this X amount of taxes. I think that would encourage them to actually give them a chance and actually help them, become more empowered in the job market. I think number two is a problem that I've had with I think organizations globally is, this insistence of giving early stage entrepreneurs micro grants as opposed to figuring out the big players and backing them with the resources to actually grow, right? And I think that this is something that government could actually start looking into, where it's like, hey, who are actually excelling in the ecosystem, who can actually, employ hundreds of digitally native talents and actually help them become more globally competitive. I think once governments start thinking along those directions, and even other players, whether it's development agencies, and thinking who can I identify for them with access to markets, access to capital, that really help position them to do more. And the third part, which I think is a bit contrarian, something that I personally believe in, is how information is disseminated. What I mean by this is, I was interviewing an entrepreneur in Kenya about 2 months ago, and I was sharing with him, like, what's something that he does every day that is non-negotiable to him? And he shared that, every day he goes on TikTok, and this man is probably in his 50s. I'm like, what do you mean go on TikTok? He goes, I spend time on TikTok because I want to be where the youth are. I want to understand the youth. Now, if governments actually want to encourage more youth to be more digitally empowered and to actually be encouraged to pursue careers in this digital revolution, they need to start creating content on these platforms where the youth are available, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, you name it, making it cool enough for them to actually feel like, hey, maybe if I pursue a career here, it would make sense. This encourages women and girls to realize that, I can actually approach this career as opposed to feeling like it's a bit distant for them as well.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Elizabeth, can I ask you the same question?
Yes, you can. I believe that the top three have to be an investment in open education platforms and systems to ensure that everyone is reached by education and what the curriculums that we're trying to implement for remote areas. And by open education, I mean, let's say having online learning, right? And as we know in Ghana and a lot other parts of the continent, technologies doesn't really permeate through rural areas. So doing education in a way where we have tutorials, video tutorials ready for students to be able to download on their smartphones and accessible to them. When the pandemic hits, I'll give a perfect example. When the pandemic hit initially, GIG students were all sent home, and we were tasked with the challenge of having to keep them still preparing for their BEC and their WASI. And we utilized, most of them don't have like fancy iPhones or complicated smartphones, but they had devices that had WhatsApp on it. And Sefakor talked about WhatsApp earlier, but most of them had devices with WhatsApp on it. So we recruited a bunch of volunteers to teach the core subjects, record their tutorials, and then send them to WhatsApp chats to our students. And the students will watch them on a weekly basis, respond to homework questions or comprehension questions, and then report back to the instructors on a weekly basis. And that's how we got our students ready for the BEC last year and the WASI last year, when the pandemic was very much pertinent and permeating here in Ghana. So I believe that open education systems and having education and these tutorials accessible to students in the most remote part of the country, the remote part of the world, is one way that we could tackle this. And also focusing on it, I think Jeff was just talking about the telcos. If the telcos could forge a partnership between the schools themselves and probably give a discount for the schools to be able to establish Wi-Fi or other systems where they're able to access the knowledge in a better way, in a more accessible way, I think it would be good. So another way that I think it would be helpful is that if we have public-private partnerships between the telecommunication companies and the school systems and governments at the same time, to ensure that no one is really being left behind when we're trying to tackle this issue of education inequity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I'm going to turn to Constance, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions. Constance, same question. What would your recommendations be? Top 3 actions.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. So my first recommendation on education, I'm adding up to what Sefakor mentioned earlier. I believe that if we are looking at elevating the impact of digitalization for young people, especially women and girls, in my case, it will require changes in government's approach to education. For instance, we should place more emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and math, that is STEM. And we should also ensure that women and girls can reskill and upskill throughout their lifetime. Now, the next one will be on entrepreneurship. We should create a dynamic digital environment conducive for the establishment of digital startups and direct empowerment, such as the e-commerce platforms for young people to be able to thrive in such spaces. Then lastly, we should also look at developing skills aligned with future market requirements. Policy makers, stakeholders should invest in skills and digital related TVET initiatives for youth, especially girls and young women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Constance. Now, we only have a few minutes, but I would really like to take a question from the audience. And I see, Trudy, you've asked a really good question. Trudy, are you with us? Would you like to ask your question, or I can read it? And we'll see somebody from the panel who would like to answer it. Trudy?
Yes, thank you so much. And really, thank you all for such a great discussion. I would absolutely love to hear from either of the panelists, based on the work you've done, what is one asset that you think can help leapfrog the vision? And I think you all have talked about it a little bit, but for me, when I think about youth, I am always thinking about it from an asset mindset, and we recognize that there are some gaps and barriers that need to be addressed. But I hope too that there are some opportunities which we can actually leverage to help us in seeing this vision that Jeff talked about, and also all of you have spoken to today. So I'd love to also hear what you found to be the one thing that really is helping move this digital revolution forward in your work.
I think I can take 1 minute of that. I think the asset that we have is this knowledge in the room here. We all have an idea about what we are talking about, and we all seems to have the solutions in our organizations, and we all can link up to experiences that are happening on the grounds to build up on that. So talking about asset is the knowledge that we have already, knowing very well that we are losing some people or we are leaving some people behind. And the main thing is we have to bring them on board. So practically, for me, the asset is we are knowledgeable about the whole topic, everybody in this room right now. But I quickly want to say, policy-wise for Ghana, especially if this platform, because I have to be very clear that as an international advocate, a policy analyst, presentation without seeing the effectiveness of it or the fruit of it, I'm actually exhausted about this type of presentations. But I hold my people accountable, or the team accountable, what we have to do. So policy-wise, the government doesn't have anything on place or in place for us, but we might want to start from there to advocate for a policy to capture this particular piece of our educational system. Because as Ghana, if we don't have a policy, it doesn't trickle down to effective practicals or in the classroom. So we have to maybe start advocating for it, because not even everybody knows about what we are talking here. So that is the asset, and we have to go forward to advocate for that right for our children in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Sefako. Would somebody else like to speak to Trudy's question? Jeff?
Yeah, I can chime in there. I believe that our greatest assets in the African continent in general is our human capital, right? And the reality here is that I also do believe that ecosystem players need to be talking to each other. Now, what I mean by this is at Blossom Academy, one of our metrics is placing our graduates into jobs. However, when we started, we just tried to train and just put them into jobs, and come to tell us, hey, they're not relevant for my current operations. So we actually had to talk to them to understand what their pain points are and design curriculums to address those pain points. Now, even before we even get into the door, they need to go through an internship first. Now, the youth have responsibility to actually go in there and be data ambassadors and share how they can actually help them become globally competitive, right? And that's what I like to term market creating innovation, right? So going there and saying, hey, I'm actually in here to help you analyze data and help you become more relevant in the job market years from now. So I think that as we build our respective organizations, we need to figure out how we can actually put youth at the center of actually helping our visions come to fruition. I've been thinking that, hey, maybe if we just kind of embed knowledge, it would solve the problem. But I feel like empowering them and encouraging them would actually also go a long way to helping push our visions forward.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, that's been a recurrent message, is that youth has to be at the center, and everything you've been saying about as this participatory approach with the very youth at the center of this transformation, so that it is adapted to their needs. Would anybody else like to answer that question? I think, yeah, go for it, Elizabeth.
I'll speak. So I think our biggest assets is each other, as we've heard Jeff kind of hint at. On this panel, I was so excited because when
Sorry, Elizabeth, we're struggling to hear you. I think we have a connection problem, unfortunately.
It's very surprising that she's muted, but we can hear her, right?
Well, I think unfortunately we may have lost Elizabeth. Oh,
sorry,
that's frustrating. Oh no, Elizabeth is back. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
So I was saying that I was born in Ghana, lived in the US for a bit, and then decided to come back and do the work that I'm doing. And one of the first people that I connected with was Sepacor, because when people hear, oh, you want to do disability work in Ghana or education work, I think Sepacor comes to mind. And as we've been working together on the topic description, Trudy, I don't know where she found Jeff, but I read up on Blossom Academy and I was so excited to connect with him, and I'm so glad that we're both speaking to this topic right now. And I think the biggest assets we have as a country, as a continent, is one another. Just realize that we cannot function and do positive work in silos. We need to collaborate, and our vision is the same. We don't want education to be accessible for everybody in the country and or the continent. So if from here, I would believe that we should connect and pledge to work with each other in some capacity so we can move things forward and not just talk and talk. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. No, so we are running out of time, unfortunately, because I'm sure we could continue talking about these subjects for hours. And I really, first of all, salute the incredible work that you're all doing, the important work that you're all doing. And, today's short discussion, we've covered a lot of ground, and there are some key messages. Obviously, you talk about effective policy and investments, but what does that mean concretely? You've all said, and there's been a very strong call to action, that we have to make sure that the digital transformation is one that promotes digital equity, that is inclusive. But how are we going to get there? Yes, we need to have the right policy, we need to have the right investments, but we need to make sure that youth are at the heart of this transformation, that is a participatory, that we're empowering youth to create that transformation, and to make sure that it's as inclusive as possible. Very much key message was it has to be both bottom up and top down, and that we should, there are let's say quick wins that we can have. You've made some very strong concrete proposals for things that we can already be doing, and that many of you are already doing, but certainly calls to policymakers that they have to upgrade education systems. And that's everything from the right policy in place, the investments, but empowering also capacity building for trainers, making sure that curricula are adapted, etc. I'd like us to thank our guest speaker, Gerald, who's had to leave us, unfortunately, and our panelists for today's insightful discussion. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. As ever with WEI, this is just the beginning of a discussion. It will continue. And as you know, WEI really focuses on actions. Our discussions, we try to make our discussions solutions oriented, and the focus is on actions. And we look forward to continuing this collective work together. It has been so inspiring to hear you all speaking today. And you're right, a key asset is all of this incredible passion and expertise in today's panel discussion. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.